Good evening and welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Alex Lord. The second version of the CFP playoff rankings came out yesterday, and there is a ton to discuss. We'll start with the Georgia Bulldogs. They are the first team out there, the 12th team ranked team in the country, but because of the first round buys and the Boise States getting in, the group of 5 team, they are the first team out right now with a bunch of SEC teams right around them. Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Alabama, they're all ranked right around there. Meanwhile, at the top, you have this list of Big Ten teams. 4 out of the 5 teams are Big Ten. Some of them have played absolutely nobody. Some of them have no ranked teams. And also Texas is the 3rd ranked team in this country. And you could say the same thing about them. Even though they are in the gauntlet that is the SEC, they have somehow got this McDonald's cupcake schedule to where their only ranked team that they have played is Georgia at home, and they lost by more than 2 touchdowns. What were your biggest takeaways from last night's Week 2 college football rankings?
The overarching theme of these bozos, that also has to, the committee has to be totally, they got to do, it has to be third-party people who have zero incentive to do any, these guys are directly connected to these schools. It's the big banks regulating big banks. There's a clear discrepancy in between what is best for college football, the fans, the teams, and their interests. But I think the overarching theme is they're incentivizing Greg Sankey and the Big Ten and the entire SEC to, one, not play each other. So to somehow finagle these Texas schedules for Georgia's, for Bama's, for Ole Miss's, for Tennessee's, for Texas, for everybody to kind of somehow not beat up each other, which inherently hurts us because this SEC schedule the first year has been unbelievable. Every single week, there's an incredible game, and it's great being a fan. Where the Big Ten, they don't play. They play. First of all, the entire Big Ten, is very, very top heavy. But they're incentivizing the SEC and LSU not to play a USC, a Georgia not to play a Clemson. These out of conference schedules. Texas playing Michigan. Yes, it ended up being good for Texas, but the overarching thing I got is just schedule a cupcake because it really doesn't matter. And another thing it is they're not. It feels like they've got short-term memory problems, or they don't factor in the early parts of the season as much as they did. They're factoring in last week way more than they're factoring in any other portion of the season. Georgia's performance against Bama in the second half has seemingly been forgotten. Georgia pretty much dominating Texas has seemingly been forgotten. And then you're going to think back to, Penn State. Who have they beaten? Well, yeah. And even Texas. Michigan sucks. USC sucks. Those 2 wins for Penn State and Texas aren't as impressive as Georgia's win over Texas, in my opinion. And their explanation for Miami, here's a good example where Indiana, you can't blame Indiana for playing cupcakes, but they're beating the hell out of those cupcakes. Miami is playing cupcakes and barely beating the cupcakes. That is a clear issue where Miami has to be. They have 1 loss, so they should be ranked ahead of Georgia. We're just taking away everything and going in the loss column at this point.
There's no rhyme or reason. That was my
reason.
biggest thing, right? Georgia last week was ranked ahead of Miami. Okay, I think we all can agree 1 loss Georgia was more impressive up to Miami. Last week they both lose. One loses to one of the best teams in the country. That's the hottest team in the country right now, and Ole Miss on the road, their 3rd straight game away from home. They haven't played a home game in over a month. None of that's taken into context, right? They can't think past.
And the opponents on the road.
Yeah, no, I know. But I mean, it's they can't, there's a lot of things that actually need to be taken into context in these losses that go way further, their schedules and stuff like that. Some of these teams are going through grinds, gauntlets, and playing all of these games on the road. Georgia coming out flat in that game. If you go look at the record of teams that play 3 straight games away from home, I guarantee you'll be shocked at how bad. It doesn't matter how good the team is. And then you consider a couple of those teams are top 10 opponents, as well as a big rivalry matchup in the Florida Gators, who are a much better team when they had DJ Lagway. None of that's taken into context. But Miami gets ranked in front of them after losing to Georgia Tech. losing to Georgia Tech. And listen, we love our Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. We give them their flowers. They're not even on the same playing field as Ole Miss. That's going to be a 56-0 game. Like, that is an absolute whitewash for Ole Miss if those two teams play. So there's no rhyme or reason. Texas and Penn State, why they're 3-4, I have no idea. Penn State's best game is a loss to Ohio State. And let's go dissect that loss.
In which they looked pathetic.
Let's dissect that loss. They did not have an offensive touchdown in this loss. They did not have an offensive touchdown against Ohio State. If Ohio State doesn't throw them a gift of a pick six early in that game, and they don't fumble a ball out of the end of the end zone, they lose that game by 3 touchdowns. It's not like the eye test wasn't there. The box score was there. So if you're just looking at the box score,
which seemingly is all these idiots do.
And then also, like, they're willing to rank one-loss teams ahead of undefeated teams. A Texas team that has done nothing, let me tell you, ahead of undefeated BYU and Indiana, who probably have just as many quality wins. But Georgia, Ole Miss, Alabama can't be ahead of Miami. Like, there is no rhyme or reason. And it seems like the rhyme is if you have 2 losses, you're behind the one. It's 2 losses. We're like, okay, now you have to be behind everybody. But 1 loss, you can be ahead of everyone if you're Texas or Penn State, even if you haven't beaten anybody.
Yeah. I mean, the Texas win over Michigan's a joke. They're going to be a 5-loss Michigan team. Penn State's win over USC is a joke. First of all, they barely beat a 5-loss USC team. Like, that's not impressive on any stage whatsoever. I mean, it's absolutely insane that these guys have the toughest job in America where they just sit around and drink, wine and talk about college football. It's a joke. These guys have no business regulating college football when they have a vested interest in college football. I was absolutely floored seeing Texas where they were, Penn State where they were, Miami where they were. Like, I want to defend Indiana because at least, compared to Miami, they are beating the hell out of teams.
Well, at least they're undefeated.
Yeah.
Too. I'm going to say, like, hey, nobody's beaten them. Like, so that alone, I think there's some weight in the argument in the fact that it doesn't matter how close your games are. Nobody has beaten them. You belong in this 12-team playoff. There's no argument.
I hate doing this, but this is the easiest example of why there is SEC bias and should be SEC bias, is because you put Georgia on a neutral field against Penn State, they would be 2 touchdown favorites over Miami. They'd be touchdown favorites over Penn State. They'd be 3 touchdown favorites over BYU. And I don't want to be the kind of guy who's like, we need pretty much an SEC and a Big Ten college football playoff. But at a certain point, we have to factor in that the big dogs are eating each other alive, and they shouldn't be punished for that.
Yeah.
I mean, next thing you know, and I hope oh my goodness, I hope this doesn't happen, is the loser of the SEC championship is punished. And hopefully that isn't the case. We haven't seen it, maybe it won't happen, but like, that's the next thing coming is a team that just missed out on the SEC championship that has 2 losses, gets into the playoff over a team that also has 2 losses in the regular season, but gets that 3rd loss in the SEC championship.
I don't see that happening because I don't think they're going to punish anyone for conference championships. Like, if you're in, you're in. If you're not, you're not. Because I think they've been pretty, consistent with that in the 4-team playoffs. Like, you're not necessarily going to get docked for a huge loss. I mean, we saw TCU actively lose in their Big 12 championship and still made the college football playoff. But I do want to remind people, because we are rightfully, it is ridiculous. And yes, these are fun conversations to have, that there's a lot of season left to play. There are 3 weeks left of this college football playoff season. And people aren't talking about 3-loss SEC teams getting into the playoff.
There will be at least one.
There will be craziness over the next 3 weeks. Mark my words, there will be crazy. There's been craziness this entire season, and everyone acts like the status quo is just going to happen over these last 3 weeks. Wait until rivalry week comes, and half of these teams that are ranked 15 to 20 lose to their rival. And then there'll probably be a bunch more that lose before that week. And next thing you know, South Carolina, who's playing hot, gets into the playoff. Like, I think that's totally plausible because everyone's just like assuming that a BYU is just going to not have 2 losses. I think
they lose this week.
Yeah, like they could easily lose. They could easily lose
Kansas
a couple
Jayhawks,
of games.
Dogs. I want to say one more thing, positive note. Georgia Bulldogs fans, it doesn't really matter where you're at right now because what you got, what you got to do, and I think you're going to do it. You're going to beat the hell out of the Volunteers, and all of this will be a moot point.
And listen, I will say this: if you don't beat Tennessee, right, you don't
belong in the college football playoff.
Like, do I think there are 10 better teams? Probably not. But at the end of the day, you got to win one of these games.
Correct.
You
can't lose to Tennessee at home. Nonetheless, at home. Now the Bama, the Texas, the Ole Miss, we're up here, peddling but like we are trying. We're LSU fans, and I can't believe they rank Georgia where they are. You go out and lose to Tennessee as a double-digit favorite at home. You got to look inward.
Yeah.
You got to look inward.
And I think that's the case with.
And I think a lot of Georgia fans would be like, yeah, I get it.
I think most of these 2-loss teams will feel the way. Like, take care of business, you're going to be in. If you don't take care of business, you probably don't deserve to be in, because you wouldn't have been in any other year. Thank God they made a 12-team playoff. I do think these will get better as the year goes on, but they are funny to argue. And I definitely think at this point, we really got to look at the people making these decisions and be like, why are they making these decisions? Because some of them are absolutely, absolutely absurd. A lot more football talk coming up after the break.